Reading 48 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice, Nicoll. Great Amwell House, October 13th, 1946. The relation of memory to the fourth dimension. Our memory is stored in rolls, in centers. Impressions fall on rolls, in centers. These are set turning by associations. When we are reminded of something, it means that a roll has started turning in some part of a center. Sometimes a roll just starts and stops again, and we almost remember, a curious but common state. Sometimes more than one roll turns. When this happens, the memory is much richer. When rolls are set turning simultaneously in three centers, let us say in the intellectual, the emotional, and the instinctive centers, the recollection has something of the quality of reality. But smell can almost turn the past into the present. The fine matters of smell touch the fourth dimension of which we have recently been speaking. Now my memory, say, of Paris is stored in rolls and centers. The memory of it is different in each center, for each center has a separate kind of memory. The impressions stored in the instinctive center recall, say, its food and wine or its comfortable beds. The impressions stored in the emotional center recall, say, its beauty in early sunlight. The impressions stored in the moving center recall, say, athletic feats in crossing Paris streets. The impressions stored in the intellectual center recall, say, the bookstalls by the river or thoughts about Notre Dame, and so on. All these impressions and 1,000,001 others, stored in rolls in different centers, form my memory of Paris. Sometimes a Paris roll is set going by some accidental association, and a bit of Paris appears in consciousness for a moment, and perhaps some other rolls turn a little, and I have a dim sense of other bits of Paris. This machinery of rolls lies in the brain. The brain is a machine enclosed in a box. If we knew enough and could look into the box and into the machine within it, with much finer senses that we possess but do not use, we could see these rolls turning. If another knew how to connect his machine with my machine, he could know Paris through me and see what I saw. It would also be possible for him to observe an idea entering into my brain in one way and into another person's brain in a different way, and he would then understand why we never agreed about anything and always remembered differently and were continually quarreling. The brain is a small machine with a very high storage capacity and millions of wires connecting different parts of it. It is much the same in everyone, but the connections used are different in different people. When you judge another person, it is certain connections you judge, used by him, that do not correspond with the connections used by you. So one realizes that one's past also lies not only in rolls and centers, but in the connections acquired by upbringing between these millions of wires that are now habitually used. That is the paths of the brain that we always walk along. Among the millions of other possible paths, our past, then, is one form, one possibility, one pattern, and one set of streets in a vast town. Now you see what is meant when it is said in this teaching that time for us is the fulfillment of one line of possibilities, but that at every moment there are lines branching out in every direction, and so infinite possibilities, and that eternity is the fulfillment of all possibilities. You remember one definition that Christ gave of God? That with God all things are possible. God is not in time, but in eternity, outside time, having nothing to do with time. That is why, in order to understand aright what is above us, we have to get rid of time in our thoughts. We have to get away from time altogether in order to reach a level of ourselves that is above us. Time and space prevent us from reaching a possible and actually existing higher level of ourselves. A man must be reborn out of time and space. For his mind, if awakened, can understand and reach to a higher dimensional world in which there is no time and all is, not was. That is why we have to start with the realization that all our life lies living in the invisible fourth dimension, and that the past is living. The past is, not was, and so can be changed. I can change my past by working on myself now. You can change the past as well as the future now if you remember yourself and cease identifying with the typical path that you usually follow as, say, in judging others. So what we do now in order to gain new knowledge, so as to understand how to think in a new way, by making new connections, for that is the start of all change of being, is truly important. Among other things, you begin to think in a new way if you think of passing time as an illusion. What is the reason of this illusion? One reason is due to these roles and centers of which we were speaking, apart from what was said earlier. When they turn, they give the sensation of the past, of what was, and so we think of the past as non-existent, dead, and irremediable. And from that derive an entirely wrong feeling of ourselves. Yes, from that and 100 other things. Roles are necessary, otherwise we would have no memory. But memory is not new meaning, new inspiration. It is not the same as consciousness in the fourth dimension, which is sometimes experienced when the carbon dioxide in the blood reaches a certain concentration. Then there can be direct access to the fourth dimension of time. A certain kind of breathing can result in this. It is then like going to Paris instead of remembering about Paris. Paris is, not was. If you could see rightly into a person's brain, you could see, say, an illness coming. The brain is strung onto time like a ring sliding along a rope. It is a machine passing through time, through one of the possible lines of time, and there is left in it a slight deposit on these rolls. This is memory. Memory is slight. We remember very little. We misremember or forget nearly everything. But in the fourth dimension itself, apart from memory, all our life stands just as it was in every detail of thought, feeling, sensation, movement, perception, and action. At death, all the life together, the entirety of the life, forms a certain kind of food, and according to its quality it is absorbed either by what lies below the earth in scale of creation, namely the moon, or by a higher level, namely the sun. So we are not our bodies, but all that is laid down in our lives apart from memory. We are our total lives from birth to death. This is our time body. It is all present, all there. And if I work on myself now, observe myself, see where I am identified, see what accounts I am making against others, how I justify myself and forgive no one, how I think only how others are wrong, how I judge people mechanically without seeing into their lives, or seeing how self-satisfied and complacent I am, how I am not at all what I imagine. In fact, if I begin to work on myself from the esoteric ideas of this work, which seek to transform us, then I may be able to change my time body by getting onto another level of time, onto another line where everything in the past is altered, so that when I re-enter my life at the moment of birth, I find things are different and even remember my previous recurrence, possessed perhaps of a strange feeling of familiarity, of having been there before. This is because when real memory is opened at death, when the book of our life is opened, not only what others did is recorded, but your own smugness, your own meritoriousness, your own cruelties and dislikes, what you did, what you felt and thought, are also recorded. This is too strong medicine to bear, save by long, sincere, and critical self-observation. So instead of such a powerful degree of direct consciousness, we are mercifully given memory on rolls, and are not allowed to have access to real memory, which only conscious man can bear and has. We as mechanical people, groping in the dark, could not bear such an intense light. Gradually, however, by work on oneself, this range of consciousness increases, and with it our personalities begin to lose power, and essence begins to develop. You can catch perhaps a glimpse of what I am speaking of, namely how little we can trust to the memory deposits on rolls in centers. If people only realized that what they call absolutely certain memory is not certain, and that in fact they cannot trust memory on rolls in centers, and that what they are sure happened did not happen as they remember, it would lead to a freeing of themselves from the brain machinery, and as a result, a loosening of everything in them, and a new feeling of themselves. This work, from many different angles of approach, is to free a man, a woman, from their habitual, rigid, set feeling of themselves, and eventually create a new sense of I, a new feeling of oneself. How many evil accounts against others, how many bitter grievances are kept alive against others on the basis of this faulty memory on rolls, which, if we could experience real contact with the time dimension, would utterly vanish. But few are yet prepared enough by the work to begin to see and bear what really happened. If we had real memory, we could never have negative emotions against others. But as we are, we have to begin the other way around. That is, to notice and separate from our negative emotions. This is called preparation of lower centers for the reception of higher centers. Higher centers work in higher dimensions. They embrace the whole life.